Hi, my name is Carolyn McCarthy. I am an artist, systems analyst, and educator from Lowell, Massachusetts. And today on this episode of the Lowellian, we are going to be talking about a pressing issue that impacts the lives and livelihoods of any folks who are living along the Merrimack River. But before we get into it, I'd like to give my two guests a chance to introduce themselves. So I will pass it over to Senator Tarr and Senator Kennedy. Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn. It's great to be here with you. And we want to thank the Lowellian for giving us a chance to talk about a really important issue, as you pointed out. I'm State Senator Bruce Tarr. I'm the minority leader of the Massachusetts State Senate. My hometown is Gloucester, and I represent the 1st Essex and Middlesex District, which is 19 communities in the northeastern part of the state, including the North Shore and the Merrimack Valley. And I'm really happy to be here with my friend and colleague, Senator Ed Kennedy. And we've developed a great partnership around the issue that we want to talk to you about today, and I'm appreciative to be able to be in the conversation.
And I'm State Senator Ed Kennedy, and I'm from Lowell, and I represent the 1st Middlesex District. The 1st Middlesex District is comprised of 5 communities, including Lowell, Dracut, Tingsboro, Pepperell, and Dunstable, most of which are located along the Merrimack River, which is what we'll be talking about today. I've been in the Senate since January of 2019. I think Senator Tarr's been there quite a bit longer than me.
Wonderful. Yeah, so let's get into it. So we're talking today about our wastewater system, and it was designed to take both stormwater and our wastewater from our communities, transport it to a plant where it would be treated, and then the clean water would be returned to the Merrimack River. Now, our specific type of system here in Lowell and others are the Combined Sewage Overflow System, or a CSO. And I'd like to just pass it over. Could you explain to us what that means, and why is that type of system detrimental to communities along the Merrimack?
Sure. Basically, along the Merrimack River are older mill cities, Haverhill, Lawrence, Lowell, Nashua, and Manchester. And I should also include Fitchburg, which is located along the Nashua River, but the Nashua River flows into the Merrimack. So always, all of the sewerage, all of the runoff water ran into the Merrimack, and the Merrimack River in the 50s and 60s, and probably even way before that, was terribly polluted. In 1972, Senator Edmund Muskie from Maine was able to get past the Clean Water Act of 1972, which created sewage treatment plants along the river. Since that time, the river has been much cleaner. I'd point out, as I did before, that that there's a beach in Lowell now on the river, and also that there's a lot more fish in the river, to the point where there are bald eagles spotted along the river, which you never would have seen years ago. So the river is a lot cleaner most of the time. However, during torrential rainstorms, the system, because it's just a single sewer system, flushes out and all goes into the river, and the river becomes contaminated. So Senator Tarr and I have started this bipartisan committee that's looking at coming up with a solution, knowing beforehand that the solution is going to be very expensive and it's going to take a lot of time. But it's something that that's going to need to be done sooner or later. And so, we thought it was a good idea to do it now. I would point out, too, that more than 650,000 people in the Merrimack Valley get their drinking water from the Merrimack River.
And so, Carolyn, a couple of important points. One, the Merrimack River has been on a steady path of improvement ever since the Federal Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. Subsequently, there's a Massachusetts Clean Water Act that was approved. And between the Department of Environmental Protection and the EPA, the federal EPA, there's been a lot of regulatory action to cause the cleanup of the river. In fact, a number of the communities that discharge into the river, the treatment plants, are the subject of federal consent decrees, so they've negotiated settlements with the federal and state government to improve. But the difficulty really is, and the essence is, that these are systems that were not designed to handle the volume of stormwater that they're taking in. And so when we say combined sewer overflows, the problem is you've got effluent and you've got stormwater. And it would be infeasible to design a plant that was big enough to always treat the stormwater. That would be an enormous plant, it would be incredibly costly, and it would be inefficient. And so what we need to work to is to try to separate the stormwater from the effluent so that the stormwater doesn't need all of the treatment that the effluent gets, and the effluent can continue to be treated. And that is a costly project. Lowell is undertaking parts of it right now, and other communities are as well. But trying to separate the stormwater from the wastewater so that both can be treated appropriately is one of the main objectives that we have. And if we can do that, we can significantly limit the number of untreated discharges that occur when the stormwater overwhelms the treatment system in communities like Lawrence and Lowell and Nashua and Manchester, New Hampshire. And the good news on that front is that we don't have a large number of plants discharging. The bad news is when they discharge, the volume tends to be significant.
Right. And so I know that through reading one of the Lowell Sun articles that in 2023, we saw the largest amount of rain that we had seen in the region for the last 150 years. So it sounds like you're saying these systems that were, Duck Island was built in 1980 and going back to even the Industrial Revolution when we would just build pipes and all of the dyes would be sent out to the river, these old systems could never have anticipated the amount of rainwater that we would receive, and therefore that needs to be separated to avoid that overflow which goes into the river.
Absolutely, and there was also a lot less residential development back then. But now it's to the point where, you can see how gigantic this problem is. It's not a problem that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts can solve by itself, or the state of New Hampshire. Because the river flows through both states, and because of the immense cost, it really needs there needs to be a federal solution. So what Senator Tarr and I have done with our committee, our bipartisan committee, is included elected officials from New Hampshire too, and other interested parties in New Hampshire to work with Massachusetts on cleaning the river.
And we really are trying to have a holistic approach to look at the entire length of the river. So, for instance, we can talk about the headwaters that are more closer to New Hampshire, but we also need to think about the downstream communities like Newburyport, where you have effluent flowing and water flowing that can significantly impact the economy and the quality of life. So this has to be a project for all of us along the run of the river, for a lot of reasons, and one of them is the cost of doing these things cannot be accomplished by any single community or, as Senator Kennedy mentioned, by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We all have to work together to get to the right solutions, because if we don't, we'll have a substandard solution. It'll be piecemeal, it'll be fragmented, and we won't capture the potential that's out there for us to significantly improve the water quality in the river all the time.
Right, right. It sounds like you're talking about the scale of this issue, because not only are we looking at geographic boundaries, now we have to also work with other senators and folks in New Hampshire. We also know, for example, Chelmsford's water is funneled through Lowell and goes through the same system. So we're looking across different boundaries, even within the same state. Before we talk about some of the solutions that you've been proposing and working towards, I'm trying to get a sense of a scale of the impacts. You mentioned that downstream, when you look at Newburyport or maybe Gloucester, when you have these events, there are certain things that your communities are unable to do, I imagine.
Absolutely.
There are health risks that occur, and I'm sure that those health risks lead to some loss in some dollars, some financial impacts. Could you talk a little bit about what are these negative impacts on your communities?
Sure. So one of the things that I think we need to point out is that we have had some success. And one of the elements of that success has been adopting an alert system so that when an untreated discharge goes into the river, the party responsible for that has to alert all of the folks along the river. And that is a huge thing. Number one, because it allows folks to prepare and act accordingly to protect their own safety and health. But two, because it raises awareness. So when folks see those alerts, they understand why this is such an important issue. Now, when it comes to the negative impacts, obviously we have communities along the coast and along the river, as Senator Kennedy pointed out, for whom that water quality is important. This is an incredible resource for people to canoe and kayak and to swim. And when the water is not conducive to human habitation of the water, it causes a huge number of problems. It affects tourism. It certainly affects the local economy, because when folks aren't coming to the water as tourists, they aren't spending money in the communities that are around the river. But it has a deeper impact as well, and that is we are a commonwealth that depends significantly for revenue on our commercial fisheries. And so, for instance, our shell fishery, soft shell clam, other kinds of things, they're sensitive to this. And so when areas have to be closed because the river is contaminated, then that affects a whole group of people directly, because their livelihood depends on being able to harvest those clams and those other seafood products. But it doesn't stop there. It moves to the folks that depend on being able to sell those products, either as wholesalers or at the retail level. And that affects, in turn, tourism again, because a lot of folks come to our region to eat those things that have been freshly harvested by our harvesters. And when those things aren't available, it has a very depressing effect on tourism also.
Right.
So the river itself is an important asset for each and every community along the river. And I think Senator Tarr and I and a lot of other people appreciate that. But really, we just have to protect it. And that's part of, I think, what we're looking to do here is to begin by requesting that the Army Corps of Engineers, the federal government, do a study. And, with that study, they would be able to determine what the estimated cost would be and how long it would take. There are people, because people will estimate 10 million, 20 million. They're just hitting a dartboard. They have no idea. And so we think that would be the best first step, and then we'll take it from there. But we can only do this with cooperation from New Hampshire, with cooperation and with the federal government's involvement. I should point out, too, that there are, in the United States, 770 communities that have single sewer systems. So I think we're getting the jump on it here. But after a while, those communities are going to be wanting to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that common element should give us some political strength if we build coalitions, first around the Merrimack and then maybe around the country, to say that this is not an uncommon problem. We're going to try to look at ways to solve it. I think the other important point that Senator Kennedy makes is we're talking about a huge investment of public dollars, and it can't be randomly invested. We need to have a study to know what the most effective ways of dealing with this are, so that those public dollars are spent wisely. But I would also point out that we have also had some success at the state level. So in addition to getting the language passed around the alert system, we've also been making modest investments in this collaborative effort. So one of our partners is the Merrimack River Watershed Coalition, and we've been able to get earmarks in the state budget for a few $100,000 over the last few years to help them be able to pull this effort together. We've also been assisted by the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, and they have been instrumental as well. So we've got a lot of good partners at the state level. And the other good news here is that when we reached out to our colleagues and our counterparts in New Hampshire, they responded. So they've been to meetings with us so far. We're having those conversations. And so there's a lot of progress. So on the one hand, you have the enormity of the problem, but on the other hand, we've got some momentum and we've got some good partnerships in place that are helping us drive the effort forward.
Mm-hmm.
I also should point out that Lowell is spending $30 million on separating their sewer system, which is a step forward. But Lowell's got over 400 miles of roadways, which means over 400 miles of sewer system. So it's going to take a lot more than $30 million. But even if Lowell were to complete the whole, separating the system in the whole city, it still is not going to be enough if we don't do it in the other communities. So cooperation between the communities, between the states, between state and federal government is critical for making this go forward. Mm-hmm. We've had 2 meetings, I think, last year. We have another meeting scheduled for March of this year. We've had those meetings so far at Duck Island. I would imagine at some point we'll probably have to, move the show around to other places in the Merrimack Valley. But the third meeting will be in March, and and so we'll see how that meeting goes.
So you mentioned you don't know what the timeline could be yet. You want to make sure that you have an accurate assessment so that you do it right and you don't have to do it again. You don't know the amount of money just yet. You also mentioned pieces around the collaboration needed. Looking at even some of those big pieces, what would you say might be one of the biggest roadblocks or challenges as you look at the enormity of this problem? Is it one of those things? Do you think there are other pieces along the way that serve as a big challenge for moving forward?
So one of the biggest pieces is coordination. There are a lot of moving pieces to this effort. And by the way, I don't think it should be under-recognized that Lowell has undertaken a tremendous project. And Senator Markey deserves credit for helping to secure some funding for that. And we also have tremendous support from our entire federal delegation, and that needs to be recognized as well. But pulling all these pieces together into a cohesive whole is one of the bigger challenges that we face. Mm-hmm. Designing a comprehensive solution is also another challenge. As Senator Kennedy mentioned, we don't want to do this in a piecemeal way, and we don't want to improve the situation, for instance, in Lowell, but have a problem still in Nashua and Manchester. So we need to design a comprehensive solution. And I think it goes without saying, but needs to be said, that funding is a huge issue. We are talking at tens of millions of dollars here, if not more than that. And so right now, we need to work with the federal delegation to help secure some of that funding. And we also need to work with our own state government. We have state revolving funds that provide low-interest loans or direct grant funding for these types of projects. But the kind of projects we're talking about with their scope and magnitude would completely overwhelm those funds. So there needs to be more, but it doesn't mean the state shouldn't be a participant. So coordination, designing a comprehensive solution, and getting sufficient funding to carry out these projects in what we think will be over the next 5 to 10 years to get the job done right.
Okay.
Senator Markey, Senator Markey's office sits on the committee with us, but I should point out that also Congresswoman Trahan has also been involved in getting that money for Lowell. And I'm sure that I know that the U.S. Senators from New Hampshire are planning to be at the March meeting. So, and they've been at the meetings that we've had so far. Mm-hmm. So as long as we can keep making some progress and keep everybody involved, I think it's going to be a long, steep road, but I think Senator Tarr and I are on the right path here.
Mm-hmm. As we near the end of this conversation, I'm wondering, you say that there are so many different folks who are involved or you need to be involved. How would you communicate the importance to folks who may see themselves as maybe less than connected to this problem that we're facing?
So that's actually a great question, because not only do we need folks involved who are elected officials and municipal officials and regulators, we need the public. This needs to be a very publicly supported effort. And the way that I see it, there was an era centered around the passage of the Federal Clean Water Act in 1972 where we saw dramatic improvement in the Merrimack, particularly with regard to the discharge of industrial waste and other kinds of things. This is really a second new era, and it needs to be widespread. So we communicate through the Merrimack River Watershed Council and through the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission. We are also accessible to anyone who wants to communicate with us. My email address is bruce.tarr with 2 R's at masenate.gov, and I'll let Ed give his, and we welcome that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Ed Kennedy at senatemass.gov.
And we're constantly exploring new ways to communicate. And one of the best ones we found is to be with you on the Lowellian. So we hope that this won't be a one-time conversation. We'd love to come back and give you regular updates and as we explore even other ways to communicate as broadly as we can.
Wonderful. Well, this has been a very interesting and exciting conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules, and we do hope that you come back. So thank you for being here.
We will. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for watching the Lowellian, and we hope to see you again soon.